Hi Jake, welcome to Ekamra Sports Literature Festival where stories meet the soul of sports. And today we have a
Thank
very special guest like you, and you have the brilliant mind behind the Knights in Gold Satin, a book that dives deep into Wolves' history. So Jack, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Real pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you very much for asking me.
Yeah. My first question is to you that Jake, what was the spark that made you write Knights in Gold Satin? Was it a specific match, a player, or the sheer atmosphere of the floodlit friendlies?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably a combination of a lot of that. It's a story that I grew up with. I mean, football is so much about family, really. And when I was growing up, I heard the stories of, from my dad, my uncle, who had been at some of these games, about the players of the time, these great names from Wolves history, people like Stan Cullis and Billy Wright and Johnny Hancocks and Jimmy Mullen, so many famous names, and the trophies that they'd won and the titles that they'd won. But this story kind of put us apart from other clubs. Other clubs played floodlit football, played floodlit friendlies before Wolves did, but none captured the imagination of the public like the Wolves games did, and what they led to as well. Really, the foundation of European football as we know it now. Really. And that always really captured my imagination. That before there was proper European competition as we know it now, these great teams from around the world came to Molineux. The likes of Moscow Spartak and Dynamo and Real Madrid, Honvéd, of course, the most famous one of all. And they were all beaten, and the clubs and the press were calling Wolves the champions of the world as a result. And that was my team, that was my club, and my dad and my uncle were there, and so it had always kind of been a story that I'd loved and wanted to find out more about, and just to have the opportunity to do that, thanks to Pitch, has been brilliant. I've loved writing it.
And you deep dive into Wolves' 1950s golden era. So how did you research at the Wolves Museum and interviews with legends like John Richards shape the narrative?
Yeah. It was it was a lot of fun. It's about 2.5 years of work, I suppose, all told. Um, it's a little kind of tricky for me in that I'm from Wolverhampton originally, but I live now just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. And my two main sources of information were in Wolverhampton, and so there were lots of trips up and down on the train between the two. I mean, Wolves Museum were fantastic. Pete Crump, the historian of the Wolves, of the club, has been amazing in helping me and giving me access to the minutes of the meetings that were taking place, the board meetings, which kind of gave extra detail, a lot of sort of information that I hadn't seen anywhere before, as well. The kind of the ins and outs of how they went about getting floodlights installed was really, really fascinating. And then the Express and Star, our local newspaper, the only way of accessing that information is in the Wolverhampton City Archive. It's on microfilm, so there were many hours spent kind of pouring through that. And then, yes, as you say, I mean, speaking to some of the players I grew up watching, to John Richards, to Mellies, to Kenny Hibbett, just absolute legends of the club, and that was such a privilege, because it was actually the first chapter that I wrote. Really was the one that they all feature in, because I was keen not only to look at the history of the games themselves and the detail of the games themselves, but I wanted to talk about their legacy a little bit beyond the European Cup Foundation and all of that sort of that side of things. And I was really interested to get their perspective on what it was like coming into the club about a decade or so after these, as you say, these glory years, what it was like, what the pressure that was like, from their perspective, and that was really interesting. Because Mel, Mel is one of us. He's a fan. He was a supporter too. He used to go along and watch the team from the terraces as we did, and he was obviously able to go on and fulfill all of our dream and play for the club and win the League Cup with the club. But it was really, really great speaking to all of them. And I had sort of access to other information too. Mike Crump, who's actually Pete's brother, had done a project a few years ago about the Honvéd game, about the floodlit friendlies, and he gave me all of his kind of research. So I had access to telegrams from Stan Collis's collection that haven't appeared in print before. Not to mention a lot of letters that he received, eyewitness accounts, which were just fascinating. So yeah, I've really sort of taken my time and tried to gather information from as many different places as possible, as well, of course, as online and my own library of Wolves books too, just to kind of arrive at just the most kind of detailed account, I guess, of these games that I could. But I wanted to very much tell it as a story. I mean, it is a story. It's the story of Wolves at that time, but it's the sort of narrative of these matches and how they how it all evolved, I guess, as well.
What is the most surprising story you uncovered about Wolves in the 50s that even hardcore fans might not know?
Again, that's a really good question. I was very interested in the evolution of the shirt because Wolves had the sort of signature of the floodlit friendlies, if you like, was the special rayon kit that they wore, made of this sort of rayon, artificial silk, that sort of shone under the lights. It reflected under the lights, and it became kind of Wolves' signature, I guess, of the games. And I was really keen in finding out as much information about this as I could. Two great Wolves writers, Steve Gordos, Clive Corbett, had done some on this before, and had uncovered the fact a fact that not many Wolves fans knew really, but this kit wasn't designed specifically for floodlit matches. It's actually been used in some afternoon matches in 1951, really to kind of get over the problem of the sort of dark winter afternoons and Wolves' original old gold kit, which isn't the brightest of colours, and they were looking for a solution to that. But I was interested to see if I could dig a little deeper, because they'd used this kit, as I say, in 1951, and then suddenly it had dropped out of use and reappeared being used for floodlit matches. But I wondered why that might be, and so the two theories that Clive and Steve had put forward was that either the Football League had said, no, this doesn't conform to our regulations, you've got to stop using this, or that potentially, as one of the Wolves directors had said at the time, that the opposition could see us better than we could see them. And so I went to Preston, as I say. I looked at the Football League minutes and I could find no record of any conversation about it at all. So it's presumably the second of those reasons behind it. But I did find quite an interesting little fact, which was that in about 1950, the Football League had looked to introduce what they call fluorescent linesman's flags. So made of what would have been a very similar material to rayon. Now, one of the Wolves directors, Arthur Oakley, was on the board of the Football League at the time. And so I wondered, and I say in the book, I wondered whether the idea for that had come from this original plan of the Football League for the flags. So it's yeah, so that kind of side of things I found really, really fascinating to research. The whole history of this amazing shirt that just appeared for the floodlit games, but as I say, had a bit more of a backstory to it than you might think, or fans might know.
Nice. And Jake, tell me about the title Knights in Gold Satin is beautifully poetic. So, how did you arrive at it, and what emotion or imagery were you trying to capture?
Um, it's actually a play on the title of a song by the Moody Blues called "Knights in White Satin," and I just thought it was appropriate with this sort of satin look shirt and the gold satin and it's of that. I mean, the Moody Blues is kind of 60s, but it's of that kind of nostalgic time, I guess. I am usually hopeless at thinking of titles. The writing part is the easy bit, but I'm terrible at kind of titling my work. It takes me as long to think of a title as it does to write it, almost sometimes. But yeah, I was really pleased to kind of sort of suddenly kind of had a wee light bulb moment, and this came to me, and yeah, and I hope it's evocative, and the front of the book as well. Duncan Olner, who's the designer with Pitch, has done just a lovely job with it. I said, could you do something with what was the program cover of the old match programs of the time? And so I sent him a scan of the Honvéd program, actually, and he kind of he used that and took out the lettering and added in our lettering and so on. So it has a kind of nostalgic look to it too. It looks like a program from one of the games, which is really the effect that I wanted to. It is a really nostalgic time. It's our golden era as a club, and one that all fans really still hark back to. Really, I mean, there are still flags in the South Bank in the ground, talking about Honvéd 54 and so on. It's our real our golden era, and I really wanted, to try to capture that sense of nostalgia and affection for it too. I really hope that the affection I feel for the story and the club kind of comes through the book too.
The 1954 match against Honvéd is often called a turning point for European football. So, how do you see that night influencing the modern game?
Yeah, it was absolutely. I mean, so when you talk about the Honvéd game specifically, it's sort of putting it into the context of it too. As I said earlier, lots of teams were playing floodlit football and were playing floodlit friendlies against foreign teams, but the Wolves matches really captured the imagination like no other, and a lot of that is down to the Honvéd game and the game against Moscow Spartak that came about a month earlier, that was very quickly overshadowed by the success of the Honvéd game. It really comes from the back of the absolute hiding that England had taken at the hands of Hungary in 1953. The famous match of the century, where there had been a real overconfidence, I guess, on the part of English football about this team from Hungary who arrived as Olympic champions, but were basically unknown. Certainly, the likes of Puskás and so on, and Hidekuti, England didn't really know what to expect there. It's certainly how it came across from how the game turned out, and they lost 6-3 at Wembley, and apparently the scoreline of 6-3 flattered England. Hungary could have had a whole lot more, but took their foot right off the pedal and just basically kept the ball in the second half. So England were able to scramble a goal or two back to make the scoreline a touch more respectable. And then they'd gone to Budapest to do a rematch, as it were, and had been beaten 7-1. So, English football was suddenly looking at itself and thinking, what is going on? We thought we were the masters of this game that we invented, and we're actually light years behind the likes of Hungary and so on. And so the game, the Wolves match against Honvéd, was seen very much as a kind of a battle, a game between England and Hungary. It was also the meeting of Puskás and Wright again, Billy Wright, who was the England captain for both of those games as well. So there was a lot of kind of baggage outside of the clubs that was riding on it too. And Honvéd went in to halftime 2-0 up. But Wolves came back. The thing that Stan Cullis prided himself on and his team on was their fitness, and the amount of matches that they won late on, because they were super fit. These players, it was a really kind of intensive fitness regime that Cullis had his players under. They'd watered the pitch as well, as they often did. But had made it a bit of a quagmire. Ron Atkinson, the kind of later famously Manchester United manager, but he was an apprentice at Molineux at the time, and he had gone out on the morning of the game, been ordered out with a hose pipe and a roller and a couple of other apprentices to kind of pack in as much moisture into the pitch as they could in what was already a wet winter. There's a lovely quote from Atkinson. He said, that Cullis had told them to go out and water the pitch, and we thought he was out of his mind. He said, it seemed so wet. But Wolves' fitness really, really came through at the end, and they won 3-2. And it was this incredible explosion of kind of national pride, really, as a result of this game. And the kind of the English press has never been slow to kind of to reach for the hyperbole, and the line "the champions of the world" was printed in a couple of newspapers, originally attributed to Stan Cullis, actually, but I think with very good reason. I think that can be debunked. Certainly, the local newspaper, the Express and Star, said that Cullis hadn't said that the journalist had been putting things in his mouth, putting words in his mouth. And certainly talking to Andrew Cullis, Stan's son, he said it doesn't sound like the sort of thing that his dad would have said. But wherever it came from, the message was out there, and then it was picked up in Paris, in L'Équipe, and the famous editorial that was then published saying, no, Wolves can't call themselves champions of the world until they have beaten or been to the likes of Milan and so on and won there. Let's have a competition to sort this out. And then, of course, the following year, the European Cup began, the forerunner of the Champions League that we know now. So it was a hugely significant game on a whole number of levels. And it certainly is worthy of its place as the catalyst of European competition as we know it now. It's earned that title with very good reason.
Do you think Wolves of today carry the weight of expectation left by the 50s legend? And how do you modern players relate to that legacy?
That is a really good question, and that's one that I was keen to address with John and Kenny and Mel, as I was saying. It is a legacy. I talk in the introduction, I talk about it being kind of Wolves' jewel in the crown, but also its burden in many ways. That this phenomenally successful period, and it's a very loyal fan base, the Wolves fan base, and it's a very knowledgeable fan base too. And we're always looking to recreate those years, as any club is, I suppose. All of the clubs with glory in the past. And there's a real sense of, yes, we want to be back up there again, and we've come close in recent years once more. The Nuno years and the Europa League run that we went on was phenomenal. Was just really kind of harked back to those times again, and those great Knights and that great team, and we had a great team then too, and then sadly, like so many things, I mean, COVID intervened. I think COVID had such an impact on lots of clubs, all the football behind closed doors and so on. But I mean, for me, maybe I'm kind of slightly biased and looking at it with kind of gold tinted glasses a little bit, but COVID had a huge impact, particularly on Wolves, a club that has always fed so much off its atmosphere, the atmosphere that the fans have created, and kind of whipping that away and taking the latter stages of the tournament away to Germany, and it was all played like as a kind of in a sort of tournament setup rather than the kind of the normal two-legged setup that it was before. I think that really kind of did for us in lots of ways. It was the beginning of the end for Nuno, really. It was very, very sad when he was no longer at the club, and we've been kind of struggling since to recapture, to find that spark again. But I think the nearest that we've come to those times is with Vitor Pereira, our manager now. I think his connection with the town is very reminiscent of that Nuno had too. We need to kind of build our team. I think we have some great players. We've obviously sold some really great players, but we have some great players who I think once they have time to bed in, as all of our previous players, the likes of Mateus Cunha and so on, took a while to bed in at Wolves. But I think when the likes of John Arias and Arokadare and Chichura and so on, when they're very much at pace with the English game, let's see where we can go again. So I'm Wolves fans aren't generally known for their optimism, I suppose, but I'm always an optimistic person. I always try to look at the positives and the glass being half full, and I guess when you're older as well, I've been going to Wolves since the early 70s. You kind of see the bigger picture, that whatever is happening with Wolves, with any club, I suppose is the same, but whatever's happening with our club, it's part of that story. It's part of that big narrative, that big arc. We've got our great jewel in the crown of the 50s, and it would be lovely to think we can start to get near to that again. Would be amazing.
Diogo Jota inducted into Wolves Hall of Fame. So he played 131 matches for them, scoring 44 goals before joining Liverpool in 2020. He came to Wolves in 2017 on loan from Atletico Madrid and played a crucial role in the club's promotion to the Premier League. Wolves have produced many greats like Billy Slate, Steve Bull, Stan Cullis, Joe Moutinho, and modern day greats like Raul Jimenez. So if you deep down, and in your opinion, where do you place Diego Jota's legacy in Wolves history?
Again, that's such a hard question to answer, because it's always difficult, I think, comparing players of different eras. But Jota was a really special talent, a really special player, and was absolutely loved by the Wolves fan base, and still is, as was so movingly demonstrated at on the first match of the season against Manchester City. I mean, the fan group, the Old Gold Pack, funded this incredible tifo that was sort of displayed at the start of the match, and the way the game had gone. We were beaten 4-0, by Man City at the start of in that game, as I say, but for a good 10-15 minutes before the end of the game, the Wolves fans were singing Diego Jota's name, and it continued after the final whistle, and it just said so much about the player, about his character, and just some fantastic memories of Jota in a Wolves shirt. The Europa League hat tricks, um, the game against Leicester, the comeback game against Leicester, the famous goal against Manchester United. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful memories that we have, and it was really fitting, and it was really nice to see him inducted into the Hall of Fame, as sort of a tribute, the final tribute that we could give, I guess, as a club. And yeah, it's hard kind of comparing players of different eras because they're so different. The world is different from one to another. But in terms of our attacking talent, in recent years, Jota's name will always be up there. Will always be talked about as one of the great players to pull on a gold shirt. And yeah, he's just really, really sadly missed. Just beyond tragic. What happened to Diogo and his brother, of course, too. Just yeah, it was a dreadful day hearing that news.
Between boardroom minutes, newspaper archives, and interviews, which source gave you the richest insight into the club's history?
Um, the board minutes added extra detail to the story. I guess the bulk of it, a lot of it, comes from newspaper reports. The Express and Star in particular, which is the local newspaper, had a designated, and still have a designated, Wolves correspondent. In those days, it was a guy called Phil Morgan, who wrote under the name of Commentator for many years. And those were invaluable, because he was writing every day about Wolves. It was a day-to-day kind of report on what was happening at the club. And so that was really great, because I didn't just, as I was saying before, it's very much a story, and I wanted to tell the story behind the games too. And so it wasn't just the detail of the match itself, but it was what was happening before, what was happening in the run-up, what was happening afterwards. And so his work was just invaluable to draw on. And then, yeah, as I say, the board minutes kind of filling in bits and pieces from behind the scenes, as it were, that were really fascinating too. I was lucky enough to speak to a couple of the players who were around at that time, as well, for the later floodlit games. Sadly, the team from Honvéd from that era are no longer with us. But it was lovely talking to Ted Farmer, who played in the sort of early 60s, before his career was very sort of tragically ended by injury. And it was lovely to speak to Brian Punter too, who was a youth player at the time, but he wore a prototype of the shirt I was talking about earlier on, so that Stan Cullis could see what it looked like under the lights. And so talking to him about his memories of that was really interesting too. So yeah, so there's lots of different ingredients have gone into it. I guess, yeah, as I say, the newspaper reports formed a large part of where I was getting my information from. But adding in these extra details, I think really helps the narrative too, and yeah, makes it a whole lot richer, as well.
And last couple of questions, Jake. So, was there any moments during your research where you thought this will completely change how people see Wolves' history.
Ooh, I don't know that there was in that way, in that it's a story that's very much, as I say, part of our legacy. You know, we very much um, still celebrate this story, particularly the great games. But I guess what I really enjoyed doing most of all was researching. I mean, all of the games had their own little quirks, and some of the lesser known games, I guess, I hope people will really enjoy reading about. The likes of Maccabi Tel Aviv, for example, who were an essentially an amateur team, who came across, who we beat 10-0, and were quite, I think, we're quite happy with that to get away with that result at the end of the day. They lost narrowly to Arsenal, so they played well against Arsenal, and I think they were just overwhelmed at Molineux. But the details of those sorts of things. But I was also really interested, which people might not know so much about. I wanted to put the games in their historical context too, where it was appropriate. So for Honvéd, as I was talking about before, that's very much the context of English football of that time, and the trials and tribulations of English football at that time, and where Honvéd fitted in with that. But I found it really, really fascinating writing the chapter about Moscow Spartak, which was the game, as I say, about a month or so before Honvéd came, because that was at the height of the Cold War, and so there was a real political angle to that game too, which people might find really, really interesting to think about. There's a great quote from a Wolves fan, Bob Bannister, who said that seeing Spartak, seeing people from behind the Iron Curtain, he said it was like seeing people from the moon in those days. It was just impossible. You would never dream that you would see actual Russian people in front of you, and so that real fascination with this team of people that were thought of as supermen, as invincible, as unbeatable. But Wolves, again, fitness told at the end, and 3 late goals gave Wolves a 4-0 win, which again gave a huge boost to the public's morale around football. So yeah, I think I hope that people will find that side of things really, really as interesting as the detail of the matches too. Certainly, I found all of that really, really fascinating. But to look at the context of these matches as well, and I guess the sort of final thought, it kind of goes back to being the little boy again, as I say, and hearing about these press reports calling us the champions of the world, and thinking, that's our team, that's what I go and watch and things. It's just how integral Wolves were to this story, to the development of this story, that Wolves were at the heart of the foundation of the European Cup. They were the catalyst for the foundation of the European Cup. And other clubs can point to more success than Wolves, and they can point to their European trophies, but Wolves will always be the only club that were the pioneers, and that's something that I think Wolves fans should be really, really proud of, and continue to celebrate.
And one last question, Jake. So, finally, if you could witness one Wolves match, past or present, which would it be and why?
Oh wow, that is an amazing question. If we're talking floodlit friendlies, I'd have loved to have been at the Spartak game. I think for that reason that I said before, that it's such a kind of iconic game in terms of the sort of political history of when it happened and so on. And of course, Honvéd, I'd have loved to have been at Honvéd too. But probably if I had to choose any game to go back to, it would probably be the very first game that I can remember going to with details of anyway. And it was in 1979. It was a game against Derby County. I remember being picked up from after school by my Uncle Keith and taken to the game and standing on the South Bank on a wooden stool because I was very short, and watching us win 4-0. George Berry scoring an absolute wonder goal. As I've said elsewhere, the goal that I still kind of judge all others by when I see a goal live. He dribbled the length of the field and scored at the edge of the box. I would just love to go back to my early days as a fan, and that wonder again, where the club, the ground was the most glamorous place in the world. And actually, the reason I pause then for a second is that it's still the most glamorous place in the world. Whenever I go to Molineux, whether it's to go to a game, whether it's to go to the museum or to research or whatever, I still get that little pang, like I'm a kid again, going, it's still the most glamorous place in the world for me. And yeah, and I just hope, as I've said before, that affection comes through in what I write.
Thank you so much, Jake, for giving us a time and give such an insightful things about Wolves and their history. And it's such a lovely speaking to you. And all the best again for the future.
Oh,
And
thank
thank
you
you
so
so much
much.
for joining.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. All the best.